The courtroom was too quiet, the kind of quiet that made even a cough sound like judgment. Derek Coleman sat at the defense table, wrists bound in leather straps. A Marine, a man who had carried the weight of war, now strapped like a criminal over neighborhood dues. He didn't flinch, he didn't speak. On the stand sat a woman in pearls, her smirk curled as if the whole room had already agreed with her. "Rules exist for a reason," she said, each word clipped and cold. "If he can't respect them, then maybe he doesn't belong here at all." Whispers rippled. From one bench, "Should have just paid the fees." From another, "All that military talk, and look at him now." The sting spread like smoke. But near the aisle, Linda Hayes shook her head, her voice low but clear. "This isn't right." The judge tapped his gavel once, his eyes narrowed. "Mr. Coleman, did you or did you not resist officers when they came to your property?" Suspicion edged his voice, hanging heavy in the air. Derek raised his eyes slowly. His silence was not surrender. It was patience, the kind that had carried him through deserts and storms. He let the weight of the question press down without giving it an answer. Behind him, the bailiff tightened the strap, leather creaking. The woman in pearls leaned closer, smile tightening. She thought she had him pinned. But Derek knew something she didn't. The men who dragged him out of his yard that night weren't officers at all. And when the truth came out, she'd lose more than her smile. Stories like this happen more often than you think. If you believe no one should be humiliated for standing their ground, subscribe now and comment the country or city you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more of these real stories to light. A failed, other a sane. Go find a notion screed. To understand how Derek Coleman ended up strapped in that courtroom, we have to go back to the mornings when discipline guided his every move, and the whispers in his neighborhood grew louder with every passing day. The morning light always came early through Derek's windows. He rose before dawn, the way his body had been trained to, the way discipline had carved itself into his bones. The floorboards knew his steps, steady and silent. On the dresser, a row of medals caught the sun in thin bands of gold. He didn't stare at them long. They weren't reminders of glory, only of survival. In the kitchen, he brewed his coffee black and strong. Outside, the cul-de-sac was still, trimmed lawns lined like teeth. Neighbors who waved politely when he first moved in had grown quiet over the months. Curtains shifted when he stepped out to fetch the paper. The air had changed. The first notice had come folded under his doormat. Past due special HOA fee. Red ink stamped across the page. Derek read it twice, then once more against the actual bylaws he kept in a folder. There was no such fee. He shook his head, slid the paper into a drawer and went on with his day. But the papers kept coming. Bright slips slapped to his door, envelopes stuffed in his mailbox, each one bolder than the last. One morning, he opened the door to find a glaring sticker slapped across the wood. "Delinquent," in block letters big enough for every passerby to see. His jaw tightened, but he peeled it off carefully, not tearing the paper, not giving anyone the satisfaction of anger. Across the street, blinds twitched. A neighbor muttered something into the phone pressed to her ear. The woman in pearls appeared not long after, striding across his yard with a clipboard tucked under her arm. She didn't knock. She didn't greet him. She stood on the step like it was hers. "You've ignored the notices," she said, her tone carrying the weight of someone who believed she spoke for the law. "The community can't tolerate non-compliance." Derek met her stare, steady and level. "Ma'am, I read the bylaws. There is no special fee. You know that as well as I do." Her smile was practiced, the kind that showed control rather than warmth. "Rules evolve, and if you can't respect them, then maybe you don't belong here at all." Neighbors peeked from porches, pretending to water plants or adjust mailboxes. Her voice was just loud enough for them to hear. That was the point. Derek sipped his coffee, unbothered by the performance. "I fought for rules that actually matter," he said evenly. "Paper rules don't scare me." The words landed, quiet but cutting. Her jaw twitched, though the smile never broke. She turned on her heel, heels clicking sharp against his walkway. That night, another notice slid under his door. This one wasn't printed. It was handwritten, the letters jagged and rushed. "Pay or face consequences." Derek folded it neatly and set it on the counter. He didn't crumple it. He didn't throw it away. He had learned long ago that threats reveal more about the sender than the target. What he didn't see were the late-night meetings in a quiet garage down the street. The woman in pearls with her clipboard, her voice sharper now, her smile gone. Men leaned against old cars, listening as she promised them authority they'd never earned. "They think we're powerless," she said. "But uniforms change everything. People obey a badge, even when it's fake." One of the men chuckled, adjusting a cap with a bent brim. "You want us to rough him up?" Her answer was ice. "I want him humiliated. I want him dragged out in front of every neighbor who still thinks he belongs here." The men nodded. One by one, they slipped counterfeit patches onto faded shirts, slid cheap radios onto their belts, and slapped magnetic decals onto dented car doors. Under the dim light of a bare bulb, the plan for Derek Coleman's humiliation came alive. And across town, Derek sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee gone cold, unaware that the next knock on his door would not come from neighbors or mail. It would come from men who thought uniforms could hide their fraud. The night air was heavy with cicadas, the kind of sound that made quiet streets feel restless. Derek Coleman sat in his living room, reading in the dim light of a single lamp. His house was still calm until the noise came. Engines, 2 of them, then a third. Old sedans rolled into the cul-de-sac, tires crunching on gravel, headlights cutting harsh beams across lawns. The paint was dull, the doors dented, but slapped to their sides were magnetic decals. HOA Police, in bold block letters that looked more like stickers than authority. Derek stood slowly, closing his book. Through the window, he watched them spill out, men in mismatched uniforms, some with shirts half untucked, others wearing belts weighed down with cheap radios. Their boots didn't match. Their stances were sloppy. They moved with the arrogance of people who thought costumes could make them real. The first fist hit his door like thunder. "Open up. You're under arrest for failure to comply with HOA bylaws." The voice barked like it wanted to be a cop's, but it cracked in the middle. Neighbors stirred. Porch lights blinked on one by one. Curtains pulled back, faces pressed against glass. From across the street, Linda Hayes froze at her window, her phone trembling in her hand. The pounding came again. "Coleman, this is your last warning." Derek's face stayed calm. He unlocked the door and pulled it open with slow precision. 3 men stood there. Their badges gleamed under the porch light, but the metal looked thin, cheap, bought from a store that sold more toys than tools. One of them stepped forward, Tommy Brooks, his chest puffed under a shirt with a patch sewn on crooked. He sneered, "You're coming with us. Community order won't tolerate deadbeats." Derek's eyes swept over them, unhurried. The wrong insignia, the badge numbers repeating, the stance of men who had never drilled, never trained. His silence was deliberate, heavy. Behind them, another neighbor whispered to her husband, "Is this real police?" He whispered back, "They've got badges, must be." Tommy shoved a paper forward, the words, "Notice of Arrest, HOA Non-Payment," scrawled in jagged print. No seal, no legal letterhead, nothing but ink on copy paper. Derek didn't take it. His voice was steady, low. "You're trespassing." The man at his left, jittery, stepped closer and grabbed Derek's arm. "You lost your chance. Hands behind your back." The command rang out loud enough for every porch to hear. Gasps cut the silence as 2 of them pushed Derek against his own car, the metal thudding under his weight. A cheap pair of cuffs clicked shut, cold against his wrists. From the crowd, a voice muttered, "Guess he really was trouble." Another, "See, they're taking him." Knew he'd crack sooner or later. But Linda Hayes pressed her phone tighter, her whisper cut soft into the night. "Something's not right." Derek kept his eyes forward. He didn't resist. He let them think silence meant defeat. The laughter from Tommy was sharp, cruel. "Not so tough now, are you?" What Tommy didn't realize was that every detail, the crooked badges, the counterfeit decals, the sloppy grips, Derek was recording, memorizing, the way only a Marine could. And though they thought they had shamed him, Derek was waiting for the moment when their fraud would collapse under its own weight. The cuffs clicked tighter, metal biting into Derek's wrists. The sound echoed louder than it should have in the cul-de-sac, like the whole neighborhood had heard it. He didn't wince, didn't strain against them. His silence unsettled the imposters more than any outburst would have. Tommy Brooks shoved him once more against the car, pressing his forearm into Derek's back as if that made him powerful. "Thought you could ignore us? Thought you were above the rules?" His words were loud enough for every porch light to catch, for every curtain to flutter open wider. The street was alive now. Neighbors lined their lawns like an audience, whispering in tones sharp enough to slice. Guess he's not as clean as he looked. Military or not, he brought this on himself. Bet he thought he was better than us. Each murmur stacked on the other, a wall of judgment rising against him. Derek's jaw tightened, but he didn't turn. He had survived worse noise in deserts far from home. From her porch across the street, the woman in pearls stood under her lantern light, arms crossed, glass of wine in hand. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her smile said enough. Every word spoken against Derek seemed to feed her smug satisfaction. Linda Hayes stepped onto her porch, her phone still recording, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't right," she said again, though her neighbors pulled her back with shushing hands. Tommy grinned, waving the fake paper high. "For the record," he announced, "this man refused compliance with community officers. You all saw it, witnesses, every one of you." The crowd murmured their agreement. A lie said loudly enough begins to sound like truth. Derek's silence fueled it further. To them, his calm looked like guilt. His stillness looked like shame. Another imposter leaned close to his ear, voice dripping with malice. "All those medals, all that discipline, and here you are nothing but a delinquent in cuffs." The words stung not because they were true, but because they were meant to stain him in the eyes of everyone watching. And from the hushed chuckles that rippled through the crowd, they were landing. Victoria sipped her wine and finally spoke, her voice carrying across the street like a verdict. "This community deserves order. Tonight proves what happens when someone thinks they're above it." The murmurs turned into nods, a few claps of agreement. Even the children, pulled back from windows, peeked to see the man who had once been their polite neighbor now painted as a threat. Derek let the words wash over him. He breathed slow, steady, like he was back on a firing line, waiting for the right signal. The imposters thought they had broken him. The neighbors thought they had unmasked him. Victoria thought she had won. But as the cuffs dug in and the crowd whispered, Derek's mind sharpened. He knew imposters always slip. He knew truth always surfaces. And though humiliation weighed heavy on his shoulders, it would not last. Tommy Brooks tightened his grip on Derek's shoulder, grinning as if the night had already written itself in his favor. "Take a good look, people," he shouted to the crowd. "This is what happens when someone thinks they're above the rules. Uniform or no uniform, we're the law here." Laughter scattered through the crowd, nervous, cruel, relieved it wasn't them. The imposters fed off it. One nudged Derek with the edge of his baton, smirking. "Where's all that Marine pride now?" For the first time, Derek lifted his head. His voice came low, steady, like steel dragged against stone. "You said you were officers." He paused, letting the quiet thicken. "Which academy trained you?" Tommy froze for half a breath. The man to his left shifted, eyes darting. We don't have to answer that," he muttered. Derek's eyes narrowed. "Badge division?" No answer. "Who's your commanding officer?" The silence landed harder than any shove. The crowd, once so sure of the story, rippled with unease. A murmur grew. "Why can't they answer? That doesn't sound right." Derek turned slowly, the cuffs clinking as he faced Tommy head-on. He straightened his shoulders, the stance unmistakable Marine discipline, even bound. From his pocket, he pulled a slim wallet chained to his belt, and with one precise movement, flipped it open. The card gleamed under the porch light, the emblem sharp and undeniable. "Staff Sergeant Derek Coleman, United States Marine Corps," he said, his voice carrying to every porch, every ear. "And what you've just done is a federal crime." Gasps broke through the crowd. Phones rose higher, cameras capturing every second. The murmurs flipped, shock drowning the whispers of guilt. Linda Hayes pressed her hand to her mouth, whispering, "I knew it." Tommy stammered, his face paling. This is just HOA business." Derek's eyes cut through him. "No, this is impersonation. This is unlawful detention. And you just crossed the wrong man's doorstep." The wine glass slipped from Victoria's hand across the street, shattering against the concrete. For the first time, her smile cracked. A neighbor's voice rang out. "He's telling the truth. Look at that ID." Another followed. "Those aren't real cops." The imposters shifted uneasily, their false authority unraveling before the crowd that once cheered them on. And then, faint but growing, sirens wailed in the distance, real, heavy, undeniable. Tommy's bravado drained as red and blue lights flickered against the horizon. He tightened his grip on Derek's arm like it might still mean control, but his hand trembled. Derek stood tall, cuffs biting his wrists, but dignity intact. His calm was louder than any shout. The imposters had wanted him humiliated. Instead, they had exposed themselves. And the night was far from over. The sirens grew louder, rolling into the cul-de-sac like thunder breaking a storm. Red and blue lights danced against the windows, flashing across shocked faces, across the cheap decals that now looked pitiful beside the glow of real squad cars. 2 police cruisers screeched to a stop. Real officers stepped out, their uniforms crisp, their movements precise authority without needing to shout. Officer Miller, tall and sharp-eyed, scanned the scene once and knew something was wrong. "What's going on here?" he barked. His voice wasn't theatrical. It was steady, practiced, the kind that carried truth. Tommy Brooks tried to straighten, puffing his chest. We had to detain him. Non-payment of community dues, HOA enforcement." His words tumbled over themselves, weak in the shadow of real authority. Miller's eyes narrowed. HOA enforcement? With handcuffs? On whose authority? The imposters froze. Their mouths opened, but nothing came out. The crowd began to stir, whispers turning into full sentences. "They never showed badges. That paperwork looked fake. I knew something was off." Miller stepped closer, his hand brushing the fake badge on Tommy's chest. He peeled it back with 2 fingers, flimsy metal, glued to a clip. His expression hardened. "Impersonating law enforcement. That's a felony." The crowd gasped. Phones caught every second, their flashes like fireworks against the imposter's shame. Victoria stepped forward at last, her wine glass gone, her face pale but her voice still carrying arrogance. "Officer, this is all a misunderstanding. I instructed them to ensure compliance. The fees." Miller cut her off, sharp as a blade. "You instructed them?" Her lips parted, realizing too late what she'd confessed. Linda Hayes raised her phone, voice trembling but loud enough for all to hear. "I've got the texts," she told them. "Make an example of him tonight." Gasps erupted, the crowd turning as one toward Victoria. Miller snatched the phone, scanning the screen. His jaw tightened. "So you're not just a witness, you're the instigator." Victoria's face crumbled. "It was administrative." "No, ma'am." Miller's tone was final, cold as stone. This was criminal. Tommy and his men were cuffed with real steel, the sound of metal closing on them far louder than the plastic clicks they'd mocked Derek with. Their heads bowed, no swagger left. Then Miller turned toward Victoria. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Her gasp was sharp, disbelieving. "You can't. This is my community. But the cuffs silenced her protest. For the first time, she stood where she had placed Derek, bound in front of the people she had tried to control. The neighbors, who had once whispered against Derek, now muttered against her. She set him up, all those fake fees. She nearly ruined his life. Linda lowered her phone, eyes shining. She whispered to the person beside her, "Justice looks different when it's real." Derek stood tall, still in cuffs, but no longer the accused. The truth had shifted. The imposters were the criminals now. Victoria was the fraud, and the neighborhood had witnessed every second of it. The bailiff who had once tightened Derek's straps in the courtroom would soon have to undo them. The story was changing, and it wasn't finished yet. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that night never left the cul-de-sac. The decals were scraped from the cars, the imposters locked away, and Victoria Whitmore's porch light stayed dark. Her house sat silent, blinds drawn, the woman in pearls now reduced to a headline. The community called an emergency HOA meeting. Folding chairs lined the clubhouse, neighbors filing in with lowered voices, the shame of their whispers still fresh in memory. Linda Hayes sat near the front, phone in hand, no longer afraid to be seen recording. At the center of the room stood Derek Coleman. No cuffs now, no humiliation strapped to his wrists, just his presence, broad, steady, dignified. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't need to. The room silenced itself. One man from the back, the same who had once muttered, "Should have just paid the fees," raised his hand timidly. We owe you an apology, Derek. We believed what we were told. We should have seen it sooner." Derek's eyes scanned the crowd, but his voice stayed calm. "You saw what you were meant to see. Paper notices, loud words, people in uniforms that weren't real. And you believed it because fear makes liars convincing. The crowd shifted, unease rippling like wind through grass. He went on, his tone low but unshakable. They thought paperwork was power. They thought fear could pass for truth. But rules mean nothing when the hands holding them are corrupt. Linda's eyes welled. She whispered, almost like a prayer, "Tell them, Derek." He let the silence stretch, then delivered the words that would stay with them long after the meeting ended. They wore fake badges. I kept a real oath. The room stayed still. No clapping, no murmurs, just the heavy weight of truth landing where arrogance once sat. For the first time, the neighbors saw Derek not as the man in cuffs, not as the target of rumors, but as the man who had endured humiliation without breaking. The meeting adjourned, but nobody left right away. They lingered in their seats, some staring at the floor, some glancing at Derek, all of them carrying the sting of complicity. Outside, the night was quiet again. Derek walked home, steps steady, shoulders high. He didn't need to look back. Justice had already followed him. And the woman in pearls, once so certain of her power, was now nothing more than a name whispered with regret. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel for more powerful real-life stories, and share this video with someone who believes justice should always win.